Very warm welcome to our God in the Living Room service, but with no sermon and no singing, but plenty to think about. And our theme, if you've seen in the notices of this church, on the Be Heard, our theme for this evening is Christian perspectives on Europe. Whether we manage to have a joint Christian perspective on Europe or not, I do not know. I very much doubt. But if you're like me, you will probably know next to nothing about the politics of Europe. Next to nothing really in content. And I think tonight's going to be a good opportunity to learn something and think together a little bit as we move through the evening. But we'll also be interviewing Chrissy in a moment, who is one of our newer members at church. Good opportunity to do that. Then I'll be talking to Kevin Rogers, who's come up from Doncaster. I will explain more later. And then Jason's going to be interviewing Jackie, one of our members. But to begin with, Matthew is going to get us warmed up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good evening everyone. So if you could all stand up, we're just going to do some press-ups, sit-up, down, joking and whatnot. We've got a quiz, so hopefully you've all got a sheet of paper, and I'm really hoping and praying that you've got a pen in front of you as well.
One pen here.
If not, just remember what you've wrote, what you need.
We do it in groups.
Okay, if you could do it in groups, okay, so working 2s, 3s, 4s, whatever. It's a good little icebreaker, you can get together, so let's get in teams. They've all got one. Yeah. Okay, you all sorted? Yeah? Okay, right, so the first questions will appear on the screen. So we're going to work in groups, so work in 2s. And question number 1 will appear on the screen.
Wow.
Okay, this week marks 20 years since the Channel Tunnel first opened. To the nearest million, how many people have travelled through the tunnel from the UK to the mainland since 1994? I'll say that again. This week marks 20 years since the Channel Tunnel first opened. To the nearest million, how many people have travelled through the tunnel from the UK to the mainland since 1994?
Here is a picture of the tunnel.
And there's a picture of the Channel Tunnel over there. And if you think these questions are really clever, I'd like to take credit for it, but it's not me that's done them. Okay, have you all got that and answer down? Okay, question 2. One of Harrogate's most famous exports, Betty's, we all go to Betty's, don't we, every day, was founded from an orphaned immigrant seeking a better life. From which European country did he come from? Okay, question 3. It is 69 years this week since the end of the Second World War. How many countries officially established governments in exile in the UK during the war? Say that again, it's 69 years this week since the end of the Second World War. How many countries officially established governments in exile in the UK during the war? Like I said, I want to take credit for these questions, but it was Jason. Never mind, really. That would be a lot more Eurovision-like. Okay, question 4. The founder of Methodism, which is John Wesley, just testing it, see if you know. John Wesley drew much of his inspiration from the Moravian Church. In which modern country can Moravia be primarily found? Yeah, the founder of Methodism, don't worry, there's not a prize or anything. The founder of Methodism, John Wesley, drew much of his inspiration from the Moravian Church. In which modern country can Moravia be primarily found? Okay. And then finally, you was all watching it last night. I was busy getting wet at big night out at Water Valley. The Eurovision Song Contest, it's meant to be a singing competition, we'll get there one day. The Eurovision Song Contest is one of the world's most watched TV programmes. In which year, I didn't know this, did Harrogate host the contest? Which year did Harrogate host? I didn't honestly know this. In which year did they host it? Yeah. Okay, right. I won't let you swap your seats because you're all Christians and I trust you. Question 1. The answer to that. Anyone have a guess? 100 million. 100? Okay, 325 million have been across the earth to the Channel Tunnel. Amazing. Wow, okay. Jason was counting. Question 2. Okay, so one of the Harrogate's most famous exports, Betty's, where was he from? Switzerland, he was indeed. How many countries, established governments in exile in the UK during the war? 6. No. 9. Belgium, Czechoslovakia, France, Greece, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, Poland and Yugoslavia. Okay, all the Methodist anoraks, you should know this one. Okay, what was the modern country can be primarily found? No. Czech Republic. And in which year did Harrogate host the Eurovision? 1982, Chris, well done. Chris was there with his long hair. Well done. Who got 5? Who got 4? Who got 3? Who got none? Hey, UK Eurovision, brilliant. Okay, well, let's give yourselves a big round of applause.
Gosh, learned something there. I never knew Harrogate had hosted Eurovision.
No.
You kept that very quiet. Now, can everybody hear? Can you all hear me okay? Because sometimes with living room services, not being able to hear so well, so we're going to be passing this mic across. Chrissy, would you come and join me on our makeshift sofa, please? Now you are Chrissy Medway Steele.
That's it, yeah.
Which is a wonderful name. What would you like to tell us about yourself that we don't know, which is probably, most of us probably don't know very much.
I don't think any of you know anything about me yet.
Where you live, where you come from, something like that?
Okay. I'm going to go horribly red, sorry. I've lived in Harrogate for about 20 years now. I live here with my husband and our 2 children. You probably all know Ollie, maybe, from Sunday school, and the little one is Melody. And by day I'm a care home manager. I work in Leeds, Monday to Friday, running a care home for adults with learning disabilities and physical disabilities. It keeps me busy. I'm on call some weekends, which is why I have my phone out on some Sundays, because I get summoned at all hours of the day, which is fun. And that's it, really. What else would you like to know?
Well, I thought, since we're thinking all things Europe, do you have a favourite place to go, recognising that Great Britain, or the UK anyway, is part of Europe? So is there a place, a day trip, or a further afield?
All right, yeah. I really like France, all over France. I think it started with school trips, being blessed with being able to go out there, and they make the best chocolate ice cream in the whole world, which is good enough reason to go anywhere, I think, in my opinion. It's just lovely to be immersed in a completely different culture, lovely architecture, really nice wine as well.
True. Thank you. Now you've already said where you work in a care home. You manage the care home in North Leeds, is it? Yes, North Leeds. And when we were chatting a bit on the phone the other day, I said about how I think I've noticed in Harrogate there's quite a few people from Eastern Europe working in the Harrogate homes. Do you want to tell us a bit about the kind of people who you notice working in homes and who homes rely on and what kind of jobs people do?
Okay. I think you're right, having managed homes in Harrogate, there's a lot of Bulgarians and Czech nationals that have come across here to work. In Leeds, it's more actually African nationals that we seem to have come in via agencies, and some people from the Czech Republic that are actually nurses in their own country, but because they can't get a PIN number when they come over here, they have to work as support workers. So it seems a bit unbalanced and unfair that they have to almost get demoted in order to get employment in this country, and that's the way it works.
Thank you. Anything else you'd like to tell us about your work, or we haven't explored further, but what would be a good day at work for you?
A good day at work. I think in care sometimes getting the balance right between doing things with people instead of for them, promoting people's independence can be really important. For someone to turn around and say, yeah, I did that, that's a big step in our work, because quite often things have been done for people and they haven't been told that they've got the skills to do that themselves. So if we can get the ball rolling with that and get them out there and being more independent, then that's fantastic. And also for families to say, wow, I've never tried that before and you've helped me with that, thank you very much. That's good.
Thank you. I think we should give Chrissy a bit of a round of applause for having the courage to come up on the circuit. The Deuteronomist wrote to the people of Israel, "So show your love for the alien, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt." Kevin, you're from Doncaster, so I don't know whether coming to Harrogate you feel a bit like an alien or a stranger, but do come up and join me on the sofa.
Well, the border control wasn't too bad this time.
Now, Kevin is a Labour councillor in Doncaster and a friend of Craig Salmon, who many of the Bilton Area Methodist Church people will know. Craig, who married Judith and Tim's daughter Kate a few years ago. And we've had to import a Labour councillor because we don't have any, do we, in our neck of the woods up here. Because the other day I was thinking, why are we having to bring Kevin all the way up from Doncaster? And then I thought, oh, because we've had a couple of Lib Dem councillors speak on different occasions, and we thought it was, well, we put out some feelers, and I'm sure someone from the Conservatives will join us on some other occasion, but we're very glad to welcome you tonight, Kevin, here. So again, like with Chrissy, would you like to tell us something about yourself?
My name is Kevin Rogers. I have been a councillor in Doncaster for the past 4 years. I originally come from a place called Mexborough in South Yorkshire, it's the jewel of South Yorkshire. It's a beautiful place. I was thinking about this because we had a sort of email chat about what we were going to talk about, and I lived there. I was born in 1980, and I lived there during the time when it really went into decline after the collieries and the heavy industry closed around there. But it's kind of had a rebirth as a place where people make things and where people brew beer. It's getting a lively arts scene, and things change over time. And so I like to think of my town as a thriving little town. When I first stood to be a councillor, I didn't live there anymore, but I stood in Mexborough. And of course, you might recall stories about a young rabbi going back to the hometown and not necessarily being taken in and loved by everybody there. So I lost the election there a couple of times. but that's the thing. It's a great joy to be a councillor. It's a great joy to represent people, to have to go out there to meet people and to gain their trust and support. And in fact, right now, I'm standing to be re-elected. So this is kind of a nice break from from campaigning, from door knocking, from trudging the streets. So I'm very grateful for allowing me to come to do this.
Oh, we're pleased to have you. We're pleased to have you. What was it that what was your pathway into local politics then, Kevin?
I've lived in Doncaster all my life, apart from when I studied at Liverpool University for 3 years, studying history and politics. I've always had a very keenly aware of it because of all the things that happened around me when I was a young child, because it was a very difficult time in the 1980s in the community in which I lived. And the thing that drew me to it was a sort of a want to change the world, a sort of a mission to help your fellow man, support people. And when I was doing myself a few notes about this, I also this sort of splinter of ambition that's in my head that I can't get rid of. So there's part of me that part of me that wants to change the world, but the part of me that wants to be the person running the show in truth.
Okay, right. Interesting. You met him here first. Do you have any special interests as a councillor? Are you on one of the committees or?
Yeah. I've been a member of a pension authority, which is quite a difficult thing because there's not a lot of cash rattling around at the moment. But as a local council, one of the things that I'm trying to sort of help and support is access to affordable credit. Because my communities across Doncaster, and I'm sure here in Harrogate as well, there are communities that don't have access to the mainstream banks, don't have access to to good reputable firms because in the past they've perhaps not handled their money very well, and so they're not they're sort of shut out from the mainstream. One of the things I do as apart from being a council, I'm a director on a credit union in South Yorkshire. And what we try to do is, provide people with affordable credit, because if they have to go to payday loan shops, if they have to go to loan shops, the interest is literally in the thousands. You're talking about products where they're taking out £100 and they've got 4,000% APR, and it just keeps people in debt. It just keeps people on that treadmill where they're getting worse and worse. And what we try to do is. Is that better? What we're trying to do is we lend money on, they're not the same rates as they are for people in mainstream banks, but a lot cheaper than the 4,000% product. But we also then try and actually get people to start saving, so that when the bad times come along, when the washing machine breaks, when something major happens in their life, that they have a buffer of savings, so that they don't get into the trouble. So that's one of the things that, as a councillor and as a director of credit union, that I really want to work on, because where I come from, Exeter, the chap walking around in the suit with the long coat, holding the leather pad, we knew who that man was. That man was the person who knocked on your door and said, "Oh, you've got a bit of trouble. You can have this money and you can pay him back a £5." What it never mentions is you're really paying back a £5 a week over a very long period of time. And he's trying to get people away from that sort of access to sort of non-mainstream cash. I think it's one of the things that we should all try and support, really.
Thank you. So obviously you're very concerned and very involved with people, local people in your area and in their everyday lives. Now, Europe is also something you're interested in. But as I was reading today, only 11% of people in Britain can actually, or think they can actually name a member of the European Parliament. And I wasn't one of them until 5 o'clock this afternoon. And then I did recognise some names when I looked up. But you're interested in the whole European Parliament question. And I think the question I suggested I would put to you now is, why should we bother? Why should we be interested in voting in, it's a couple of weeks' time, isn't it, when we have European elections?
Yeah, so it's May 22nd, so we're about 11 days off the poll. I think it's important to vote just in general, because I think you should express your preference in a democratic society. But the big thing for me is that it's a very large and big, complicated organisation. It's not extraordinarily popular in the European Union. But I look at it on this basis, like I said, I'm a history and politics graduate, that 100 years ago this year, all the major European countries were lining up to start what was the most horrific conflicts seen up until that point. And while the process of creating European law is long and drawn out, it's better that we're sat around a table as nations, better that we have a parliament where you and I are represented by people who we elect, than actually solving our differences through armed conflict. Because, you know, looking back when they formed the European Union back, the idea back in the 1950s, they'd seen the Franco-Prussian War, World War I, World War II, where literally millions of people had their lives turned upside down because the governments of those nations could not come to agreement. And so the fact that we have, it's 28 nations, it's about 500 million people electing 750 MEPs, and it's a fantastic idea that we can be more together, that we can have prosperity together, that we're not trying to beggar our neighbours to increase our wealth, that we have this force to do this on a continent that has repeatedly torn itself apart over the millennia, not just the centuries, the millennia. I think that is a very important thing.
Thank you, and that historical context is quite important for us to remember. But what are the kinds of decisions that are being made at the European Parliament that really are affecting us? Because I can live my life quite happily and quietly, well, quietly-ish, without often running into aspects. So what does it kind of impinge on us?
I think the things that the European Union takes on are matters such as, for example, climate change. One nation by itself, sat on a very large continent, by whatever measures it chooses, cannot stop climate change. You have to have a bigger block of people working towards having more renewables, having carbon capture technology. And here in Yorkshire and Humber, we have one of the first carbon capture mass projects being built, where the carbon will be sequestered from the coal and will be pumped into the seabed of the North Sea to try and draw more oil out. And although you might argue that's not really helping, but it's those sort of large-scale projects that a union of 28 nations can pull together and can tackle. It also comes to things like workers' rights, rights to paid leave, rights to maternity leave and all those sort of things. They all flow out of the social chapter, and the reason that Europe's important in that sense is that all the nations are sat around the table, and one nation could say, well, we're going to have no rights for people, and our workers will be turning out more products, therefore we're going to beggar our neighbour, if you want. The other side of that, of course, is that businesses then are free to trade to a massive market of 500 million people, and that can drive that prosperity and actually lift all the nations across Europe. So I think those are the things that are really quite important in these nations.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Now, this isn't a hustings. It isn't. It isn't that kind of an event. This is a church evening gathering to learn and think together. So I'm not going to kind of throw it open for anyone to ask any questions, but we are going to in a moment have a break in which we can talk to each other and talk to Kevin while we refresh our coffee or tea.
Becomes that member. It's a regional ballot for the whole of Yorkshire and North Lincolnshire. And what happens is they tally up all the votes that you vote for a party rather than an individual. And in Yorkshire and the Humber, we've got 10 parties to choose from. And then all those votes are counted up all around the region and are fed into the central count in Leeds City Council. And they use what is called the de Hont method. And I'm not going to sit and explain it because I think I really would put you all to sleep if I explain it. But generally, they look at, we have 6 seats, and so whoever's got the most votes at the party will get the first seat, and then it will then tumble down each from there. The last election there was the Conservative Party got 2 seats, the Labour Party got 1 seat, UKIP got 1 seat, the Liberal Democrats got 1 seat, and I think it was the British National Party, Andrew Bromers, who got the 6th seat. And that was all drawn from all the different votes from all across the region. So you'll not be voting for a specific individual, you'll be voting for a party on a list system. One of the worrying things looking at this, because I was looking at some of the statistics, is we started voting for the European Parliament back in 1979 before I was born. So that tells you how old I am. And 63% of the union voted in that first election. The last election in 2009, that went down to 43%. So less than half the population of the European Union cast their ballot. Now, like Roberta said, I'm not here today to tell you who to vote for, because it's just a general talk about Europe, but I just do think it is important that whatever your view, whatever your preference, whatever you want to see coming for the European Union, that you cast your vote. And I suppose that the last thing I'd just say in it is, on this occasion, because we had a rule change, I think the last treaty, we're also voting for who's going to be the President of the European Commission, the Commission being the body that oversees all the functions of the European Union. So whose ever vote comes out on top in this poll, that will influence who will be the head of the European Union. So for the first time in the Union's history, directly we will all choose through our votes who's going to run the show. So I think that's possibly something else you might want to consider when you're looking at these elections.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And I think you're going to come back up on our sofa equivalent when Jason's interviewing Jackie as well, just in case there's anything you want to chip in as we do that in the second half. But can we say thank you to Kevin at this point for coming along, and he's available for more question answering individually over the coffee break now. So thank you. So do go and replenish your cup or get one if you haven't had one. And
Okay. So we've got Kevin back, and who are you?
I'm Jackie. Do you want me to say a little bit more on that?
Where are you from?
Okay, well, I think most of you do know me, so I'm trying to think of a little bit of something different. I was born in Bournemouth. I've just been on holiday to Hornsey, which I would recommend. It's a very nice place, especially with good company. And I've got 2 children, and I've grown up, of course. A grandson, and another one on the way. My son, that is. And I work with people with disabilities, so there's a bit of a theme going on here, which I didn't actually know that Chrissy did, so that's quite nice to know that. And so I think we'll be talking a little bit more about that, perhaps.
Yeah, well, we can go on to that, because I mean, some of you will, I suppose, know where Jackie works, but do you want to just tell us a bit of an introduction to the, well, it's not a business, is it? You call it a, you say it's social enterprise, isn't it? So do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yes, the social enterprise is the new buzzword, I suppose, at the moment, but yeah, I would count Paperworks as being a true social enterprise. We provide training for people with disabilities to prepare them for work and help them into work if that's where they want to go. We run the business by having commercial work in, that the trainees can practice their work skills through actually doing jobs for commercial customers. We aim that the work side of it can actually keep us running, but we're nowhere near that yet.
because clearly to support people and to do one-to-one training that we do, we need more staffing than you would normally do, and to get the production going, we need a lot of volunteers as well as paid staff. But all the money that we have goes back into the training and developing the people that we aim to work for. And we listen to the people that come to us to see what they want and what training they want, and that's how we run our business, through what they want and what they need. The commercial work that we do is basically around printing, packing, office services, but we're always very interested to look at others. And our latest is to set up a shredding business. So it's called Shredding for Bedding, it's going to be. And we can shred all your paper, and then we sell it on to for horse bedding, and apparently a lot of other animals can use it as well. And we can do confidential shredding, not to the standard of health, or some of the political stuff we're not allowed to do, but we can do it to a certain level. So that's our latest thing, and that all came from one of our trainees who said to me one day, I said, what skills do you think you've got then, Alan? You've been working with us for a long time. And we did a lot of envelope filling and a lot of paperwork at the time. And he said, I can do shredding. I can do shredding. And that's what he did. He liked shredding. We had a very small machine, sort of one like you have at home. And he took this machine to an office, and that's how it all started. He now says, I don't want to do shredding. But that's how things develop, isn't it?
So obviously it's grown quite a lot, and you've expanded over the years. So tell us a bit about the funding then for this. Obviously it's costing quite a lot to expand out.
Yes, we started supporting 6 people for a year, and that's now 20 years ago. We now support 30 people, just over 30 people on the Harrogate site, and we've got 15, I think it is, on the Leeds site. So we've expanded to Leeds, we're in Bilton now, and that's growing very rapidly. And so we had to look at different sources of funding, and over the course of the 20 years that I've been there, we've had to look at it in very many different ways. So probably, I'm guessing about 15 years ago, which is when it became really crucial that we would have to become more self-funding, we had to look at different grants. And at that time, you looked at the European funding and you couldn't touch it because you couldn't fill in all the paperwork, you couldn't get all the tick boxes. Whereas now, it was quite interesting when Jason first asked me, how do you get your funding and everything, I said, oh, well, we're working much more to be more self-reliant, which we are, and we continue to do that. And he said, well, don't you get European funding? And I said, oh no, we don't get any. Actually, we get quite a lot. To set up Leeds, we had quite a substantial amount. And for just doing the sort of training that I do, I work in partnership quite often with different organisations. And the number of times I now see the European at the bottom of the letters. So, although we can't access the funding direct, I've realised that actually, because of European funding, we have a lot more resources open up to us, which was quite an education to me. I didn't realise that that's how it's happening. So yeah, the business brings in money, the training fees bring in money, and then other grants and funding.
I mean, you say that you haven't noticed it. I think a lot of us probably do miss Europe in our lives, and we don't realise quite how it affects us. And I hear a lot of people saying, well, that's all fine. If we weren't giving this money to Europe for them to hand it back to us, why can't we just take it directly from local councils or from Westminster? Why would you rather have that coming from Westminster, or are you happy to see that coming from the EU?
I suppose, realistically, I just need the money to run what I want to do, if I'm being very honest. I do worry about money being managed by different groups. And so in my experiences. I'm working with some organisations, and yeah, I see that the money is sometimes being spent for other things as well. Should it come direct from our government? I would probably say yes. Should we be able to be self-reliant? I would say I hope we can be one day. I'd like to be that much more, that actually we can build up our business, that we can run ourselves, because I think we've got the potential to be able to do that. I think the key to me is when I realised that actually the people that knew how to manage the money were managing it. That works. Now, whether it needs to be Europe or not, I don't actually know. I don't actually know enough about it. But I thought it was really, really interesting to know how much of the money that I can source actually comes via that route. You might know more about it.
Sure. I mean, the experience I have in Doncaster is probably quite different from what the experience is in Harrogate. Like I mentioned, obviously we've seen some of our traditional industries decline, and what European money's done for us is that it has helped us establish a very large international airport in our area, and it could only come in sort of being primed with money from the Regional Development Fund, because to bring people up from the City of London to come and pour the cash into our coffers to make these things happen when we don't have that proven track record of, say, you know, the southeast of England, it is a big ask. So for us in Doncaster at least, it has been that sort of support to get to sort of change our economy, to bring in new sorts of jobs into Doncaster. It's also done some of our remodelling our town centre, so it becomes a place where we can build a £23 million theatre, and which is something that Doncaster has desperately needed. We've had theatres before, but very small theatres. So it's sort of changing our quality of life. Now, there's a question about, is it okay if it comes from Europe, is it okay if it comes from local taxpayers, or is it okay if it comes from national government? I think that the thing about the European Union started off as a trading bloc, and areas that were more disadvantaged in that sort of massive market wouldn't be able to compete, because they just don't, they just don't have the sort of investment to make that leap. So part of the deal about having this open, well, common and then obviously single market, is that the areas that were in decline would be helped and supported, and that's kind of the European deal. And yes, we pay, well, it's contested how many £1 million a day. It's a contested figure, and I don't really want to try and get into it here because we would be here all night, but we do pay in so that we can be part of this organisation. At the same time, it then allows us access to that 500 million people market to sell our goods into, and that helps increase our prosperity here, and I think that's the sort of payoff, and you have to weigh up whether that's something that you want to continue, which is something that is a completely legitimate debate, and I think needs to be had over the next few years.
Thanks for that. I'm going to move on slightly to the kind of the European Union is, I mean, I suppose at its heart, before it became, well, I mean, it always has had trade in it, but I guess it's ultimately a humanitarian project there to improve, to ensure peace and improve people's lives rather than to, allow trade, even though it's achieved through trade a lot of the time. And I know that Jackie has done a lot of campaigning before, because I have done some of it with her. So if we're going to talk a little bit about climate change, and you mentioned this before, Kevin, and also aid. I mean, I've had flyers through my door, and I think you have as well. Have they mentioned a lot about aid or climate change?
You're right. The things that the European Union does in terms of how it spends its aid budget and things like that, those have not really got any sort of time, and actually, it's actually one of the areas where they've got a decent record, where they are getting substantial amounts of money, aid and support to help, people in less fortunate countries. But of course, like I say, because some people don't want to talk about certain things and letting other people have all the running, that's what's framed the debate certainly in this election.
Yeah. I mean, the EU is, in terms of its figures, it's obviously not a country, but it is the biggest aid donor in the world. The UK is obviously a big part of that as well. But I suppose you'd hear many people, people like Nigel Farage, people like that say it's just the EU meddling in our affairs, and particularly with we've had recycling targets, and I don't know if that affects paperwork. So I assume it must do if you don't necessarily see it every day. Recycling targets, carbon emission targets. Do you think that's harming our businesses, or do you think that's actually a good thing? I guess there's a Christian perspective to this that you probably aren't going to hear on the party political broadcasts.
Yeah, we as an organisation, Paperworks, are very keen to do things that we feel are right for our community, because that's part of being a social enterprise. You're part of the community and you offer things to the community. So that's where our recycling comes from. We want to be able to recycle. We make efforts to. A lot of our businesses aren't so good at it, so we actually recycle their products rather than they do, or we look at ways of recycling. And we try not to use too much energy and things like that. But I have to say that that's about us as an organisation, because we don't we're not big enough to be in the bigger rules anyway. And when we do look at the guidance, it's not personal enough, if you like, for our business. So, Paperworks just does it because we're a social enterprise, we want to.
One of the things about the European Union is that I know literally they have billions of euros budget, but in terms of how much they spend versus the gross domestic product of the whole European Union, they spend less than 1%. Most governments spend something like 35 to 45% of the gross domestic product of their country. The big power of the European Union it's called soft power, which is why it's not moving much in Ukraine. That's a bit of a problem, I suppose. But by saying to our market will only accept cars that can put out X amount of carbon emissions per gram, we change the way in which the world chooses cars, because they want to sell cars to us. They want us to buy the car. So by us saying our market only accepts a certain standard, it can be a force to drive things like on the climate change agenda. The other one being, of course, the sort of recycling and increasing the amount of renewable energy by creating the sort of framework for it to happen, putting out money to pump around that. We can actually have a substantial impact on the CO2 emissions going out from Britain. And the other side of that is then our competitors around the world have to look and say, well, if we want to go into that market, we have to be clean as well. So it's a soft power by saying what our market will accept, and not just allowing it just to be a sort of high energy, high carbon race to the bottom. I think that has some impact, I think.
Well, thanks for that. I think we'll probably bring it to a close there, and I'm sure there's loads of questions that you can ask about all of the workings of the EU to both Kevin and Jackie from the business and political perspectives there. And I think if we give Jackie and Kevin a round of applause, and then we'll hand back.
Thank you very much indeed. Gosh, it's getting quite atmospheric now, isn't it? The darkness. But, lots to think about, and of course, Jackie, I think everyone will know, is a member here at Bilton Area Methodist, and Kevin, you're involved in Methodist Church, Bentley and Sculthorpe. that's a part of the background of the conversation that we've just been listening to. That's part of our practice to make our intercessions by listening to the news headlines, which we will do. And then we have two short passages, well, my passage isn't so short, but it's not terribly long, two passages of scripture and a final prayer before we finish this evening. So if you would like to be as you are when you are praying, Jason will play for us the headlines, and we will bring our prayers to God as we hear them.
BBC News with Mike Cooper. Voting is underway in unofficial referendums organised by pro-Russian groups in eastern Ukraine. Residents in the regions of Donetsk and Luhansk are being asked whether they support the militants' declarations of independence from Kiev. There have been long queues and chaotic scenes in Mariupol, where only 4 polling stations have been provided for a city of 500,000 people. The government and rebels in South Sudan have accused each other of violating a ceasefire hours after it came into effect. The peace deal, which was signed on Friday, was meant to bring an end to 5 months of fighting, in which thousands have died and more than 1 million people displaced. The Roman Catholic Archbishop of Abuja says Nigerians feel a sense of national shame over the plight of hundreds of schoolgirls seized by the Islamist militant group Boko Haram. Cardinal John Onayakan told the BBC he was afraid the girls had been drugged and forced to keep moving location. The front-runner in the Afghan presidential election, Abdullah, has received a major boost to his campaign after the third-placed candidate in the first round endorsed him. It's the first significant deal to emerge before the final round. Officials in Iraq say gunmen have abducted and shot dead 20 soldiers in an attack on a military barracks in the north of the country. The assault took place on Saturday night, south of the city of Mosul. The soldiers' bodies were later found nearby. Protesters in Hanoi and other cities in Vietnam have staged some of the largest anti-China rallies in the country in recent years. Demonstrators are demanding the withdrawal of a Chinese oil rig from disputed waters in the South China Sea. Austrians have been celebrating after the bearded drag performer Conchita Wurst was crowned Queen of the Eurovision Song Contest last night. Her song, Rise Like a Phoenix, gave the Alpine state its first victory in the competition in almost half a century. Conchita said her win was for all people who believed in unity and tolerance. BBC News.
As we prepared for this evening, we wondered about which passages of Scripture might help us formulate our response as Christians to Europe in particular and to the elections as they come up. And this is where we went to. I'm not going to comment on it any further. I'm just going to read Luke 12 verses 13 to 21, and then Matthew's going to read from Luke 6, 27 to 31. A man in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide with me the property our father left us." Jesus answered him, "My friend, who gave me the right to judge or divide the property between you two?" And he went on to say to them all, "Watch out and guard yourselves from every kind of greed, because a person's true life is not made up of the things he owns, no matter how rich he may be." And Jesus told them this parable. There was once a rich man who had land which bore good crops. He began to think to himself, "I haven't anywhere to keep all my crops. What can I do? This is what I will do," he told himself. "I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, where I will store my corn and all my other goods. Then I will say to myself, 'Lucky man, you have all the good things you need for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and enjoy yourself.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night you will have to give up your life. Then who will get all these things you've kept for yourself?' And Jesus concluded, 'This is how it is with those who pile up riches for themselves, but are not rich in God's sight.'"